Hey everybody, welcome back to Engaging the Phenomenon. And today we are honored to have on our guest Mike Fiorito, and he is a English professor. He is an author of two books, for all we know, and what we're going to be talking about is UFO Symphonic as well, and a journalist. So welcome, Mike.
Thanks so much, James. I really appreciate that. There are other books too. Those are the UFO, uh, I would say, kind of centric books. There was
Yeah.
another book prior, which was a kind of a philosophical science fiction tales in the I would say in the spirit of like Italo Calvino or Jorge Borges. Um, Maybe I'd like to say Philip K. Dick. It was said by someone that reviewed it. But thank you so much for that great intro, and it's great to be on the show. I watch your program all the time.
Yeah, I mean it's great to have you on. As you know, we've met. I met Mike
Yes,
as a friend and colleague, and yeah, again, we were just talking before. It's great to have somebody in your field uh, participating in this conversation. So, how does an English professor and author and journalist as yourself come come into the UFO topic?
to some extent, you are, you bear some responsibility here, James, for better or worse. My wife is a little worried. She's not completely sure of what this is all about. Although she was a religion and philosophy major undergrad, so she's open. Um, it's interesting. I think that the I had been finishing a book called Falling from Trees. And when I'm finishing a book, or sometimes even in the midst of a book, I look for things to uh, kind of give me a different perspective, to knock my paradigm off, to make me think. And so I came across uh, Jeff Kripal's book, uh, The Flip, and I was reading the book, and it really drew me in. And I hate to say, but it did kind of flip me. It opened me up. I wasn't prior to that, I wasn't really focused on the UFO. I mean, I would say I was like most mainstream people. Oh yeah, sure, there's probably life, intelligent life in the universe. Um, but we haven't found it. I had this kind of mainstream view of it. I hadn't really delved into it. After reading Jeff's book, and then also then some of the New York Times article, uh, I would say that that was something you could not look at. Of course, then I started to accumulate a huge library and really think about it. Reading John Keel, Whitley Strieber, delving very deep. As you know, my wife will say that I tend to do that when I get hooked on a topic. I kind of there's no turning back. I would say too, going to the anomalous conferences was it was a great way to get educated on the various threads that go into this. So, folklore, anthropology, um, other uh, environmentalism, all of the different speakers that you had, which, as you and I joked, I mean, these were 8-hour conferences. They were long
Yeah.
conferences, but they were not boring. Mostly, I just had to leave to kind of, go meet up with, my wife or do something like that. But they were great conferences. Of course, you had Whitley there, you had Jeff Kripal there, you had Diana Pasuka, you had, great speakers. So that's how I got into it. And then, like most people will say, once you get into this topic, you find yourself, it's not just, I think that if you're just reading about just UFO stuff, you're not really embracing the fullness of the topic. I find myself reading stuff on folklore, stuff on mythology, Bernardo Castro philosophy books, um, James Madden's. I took his class on hyperobjects, unidentified flying hyperobjects, I think it was called.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you kind of find yourself in this constellation of subject matter. That's one of the delicious aspects of it. It's sort of like blah 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 blah. I'm drowning in all of this, and if you seek knowledge and learning, and it's a certain kind of knowledge, I would say it's not a knowledge that is like right on the nose. It has this trickstery quality to it, as you know, as we've discussed. This kind of you have to look at things multiple ways. Um, there's a lot of humor in this as well. I really would like some of the conferences to have a little bit more humor, uh, because there is that aspect of it, that is actually funny.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and that, as Greg Bishop said in the show, I just watched all of the Cosmosis series. That there's that trickster element is is trying to teach us something. You don't know it all. Stay humble. Laugh at yourself. So that was a long-winded answer.
Yeah, no, that's fine. It's good for people to hear a little bit about you and your thoughts and how you, again, you came into the subject. And yeah, I did want to bring it up because I didn't have you last time for when you came out with the first book. If
Mhm.
you wanted to describe a little
Sure,
bit about that book and the approach that you took with the book. Uh,
sure. If I can say one thing too, so it's funny that Cosmosis, um, when I had a technology consulting company that was called Cosmos Consulting. I named it after
yeah,
something I loved. And then the website that I had was Cosmo Sys because Cosmos was taken. So it was
no way.
Cosmo sys.com.
Yeah,
Interestingly, how these
no way.
synchronicities
Yeah,
occur. So the book, for all we know, it's a fiction book, and I wanted to. It was published by Loyola University.
there
It's
you
the
can
same
see it.
publisher that is. Yep, that's it. That's it. And if you hold the two books up close to each other, I don't know if you have them right there.
I do.
One thing I think unconsciously I did, because I work with the artist, you'll notice that in For All We Know, the person is down below the beam of light under the UFO. In UFO Symphonic, the UFO has gone up into his consciousness or her consciousness. So I didn't, we discussed the artwork, the Pat Singer. Um, ultimately, she executes it. But
Yeah.
For All We Know was my my intention was to write a fiction book. Um, I certainly didn't want to. I didn't want to self-publish the book. That's totally fine if people do that. I think that's a great approach. I wanted to go through a publisher. If you have personal accounts of you have a personal UFO account, it's very hard to get that published if you don't self-publish it. A lot of the
Well,
presses will stay away from that.
I just want to ask what's in your experience and opinion, what's the difference if you self-publish or go through a publishing company?
Well, I think there's a certain vetting. As a writer, as someone who's been a journalist and who's, you sort of go through the mill of when I, first submitted stories, when I first submitted uh, my writing, and then you get accepted and you're kind of getting vetted along the way. And then in some cases, I collected stories and submitted that as a collection, and now the publisher vets it. So it feels like there's like gates that kind of that you get through. Self-publishing, I think it's a great thing to do, especially if you have a big following of people. You're already an established writer. So that will, first of all, you'll make more of the money. Um, Also, if you go with a press, you have other people participating in the production, and a book production is quite a heavy lift. There's forget the editing. I mean, editing is a pretty it's interesting because before I even submit it to a publisher, I work with people to edit it, to review, to look at it. The publisher gets it. There's still editorial issues.
Yeah.
You get the galleys, there are still editorial issues. So, self-publishing, you want to have, if you have a team of people that work with you, that's great. And also the artwork and all of the assemblage and the putting together, there are special tools that a publisher will know how to use to make the book look really fine, look like a professional book. I mean, even if you didn't open the book and read the pages, you look at those two books and say, these are well done. They're
Yeah.
very handsomely put together. But I do think those things they're personal, and everyone should approach that depending upon what their objectives, goals, and all that kind of stuff is. Um, for all we know, it reads like a memoir, so it has this memoirish quality. Yes, there are definitely truths that are there are autobiographical details in there. What I wanted to show was the arc of kind of a pessimist. He's a kid from a tough neighborhood in New York City, kind of like I was. Um, he's not one to easily believe things, and but he has this. First of all, he has these encounters. So he has early on, he has UFO encounters, and then he finds himself on this spiritual arc, this trajectory, and all the while he's sort of resistant. And I wanted that to be the case because I wanted the reader to experience the evolution of someone's spiritual growth. I mean, certainly there's a lot of me in the book, but I didn't want it to be like bang head on. He's there's no tension there in that case. It's even a little that book is a little. There's some hard scrabble scenes. There's a gun put up to the narrator's head. So there are some things in that book that are, they're not all pretty and beautiful and, illuminated kind of stuff. Um, then there's also the aspect of in that book, and you guys talked about it in your show Cosmosis, that there's a kind of awakening that the narrator has, and it's even an awakening on the terrestrial level. So just waking up to the fact that I'm a living creature on this living planet, observing that there are different kinds of birds that you could name. When I was a kid, it was just that's a bird. Now, I don't know about you, but I actually looked into it and began to learn more about uh, particular birds. Um, Also, learning about trees, tree types, learning about the environment, appreciating the environment. So there's this sort of terrestrial awakening um, that also is accompanied by an extraterrestrial awakening, a beyond Earth experience. But I thought the two were important. Um, you guys talked about it in Cosmosis that you have the government ekes out information on uh, UFO matters. Oftentimes it's misleading. They want to kind of control the narrative. And one of the things that I think they want to control is to keep us from the act of self-realization. I think there's a certain amount of intentional effort that goes into keeping us busy,
Yeah.
keep us, on the hamster wheel, kind of doing stuff, but keep us away from reflecting on, who we are, human beings, in this interconnected world on this planet, but also beyond that too. Spiritual beings that uh, have opportunity for experiencing more of who we are. And I'm not going to say it makes you necessarily better. I would leave that to my wife to make that
Mm.
judgment. I hope it does. But to make you open you up to um, more self-discovery. So that is kind of what that book is about. There's this, arc of a kid, and you sort of follow him through his life. You'll see elements of everything I've read in that book, including, of course, my own creative spin on it. There's a lot of death in that book, which had really the thumbprint. I would say there was a lot of influence of Joshua Cutchin in that. And I told him, I said, he read the book, and I said, you did see your your impact, and he said yes. Um, and Jeff as well. Jeff and Strieber talk about what is it that we're seeing? What is this? What is it that we are encountering? Is it us? You know, is it just some reflection of us?
Yeah, and I'm curious from when you first came into the subject, have your ideas changed or transformed over time? And to say,
Yeah.
you know, you have just say UFOs, right? Like unidentified flying object, or now UAP, unidentified anomalous phenomena. And a lot of times, the general consensus reality automatically makes the jump to aliens,
Hmm.
extraterrestrial visitors, which may represent some aspect of the UFO phenomenon that's observed and encountered throughout human history. But, again, it kind of gets lumped together. But, you know, how have your ideas evolved, or even what's even stayed the same in the course of your inquiry?
Hmm. Yeah, they have evolved as I've read other things. I also don't feel that I have. I feel, uh, when Greg mentioned this, Greg Bishop mentioned this in Cosmosis, that I'm much more open to not knowing exactly what we're talking about. This is not. This is a very fluid kind of thing. So, yes, while my ideas have evolved, and to some extent they've integrated with. I was a philosophy major undergrad, and to some extent, it's sort of those two things have come together. They've kind of, and I think we talked about this. You get to a certain point where you look back and you say, well, that's interesting. I've studied philosophy. I was interested in Jungian uh, psychology. I was very much interested in cosmology. I read science fiction all my life. I've always been fascinated with UFO art, with UFO uh, literature, and so on. So it's sort of like I've been preparing all my life for this, it feels. I think what the major change is that when I was looking at from the outside before I got deeply into it, a UFO was a thing out there. You could knock on it. It was metal. Um, Now I see it very much as a psychic. It's very much a psychic phenomena, and it could be. I like what James Madden said, that it could be a kind of hyper object, part of something bigger that we just don't comprehend. And he used some interesting analogies. I like the analogy that it's from an old book. It was written, I guess, about 1900 by Edwin Abbott. It's called Flatland. And so in Flatland, you have the beings in Flatland. It's an imagined book. They live in, it's either vertical or horizontal, right? This is their entire world. So anything that has three dimensionality is incomprehensible to them. So if I like stepped my foot into flatland, they would just see the like where my foot intersected with that flat surface. They
Yeah.
would just see that kind of the vertices of my foot.
They would only be able to perceive it in two dimensions as they are.
Exactly, exactly. And so, that. that illustration, which, man, that's more than 100 years old.
Right.
But
Yeah.
that says a lot to me about what it is potentially that we're seeing. Where we're seeing, we're experiencing, we're hearing is this encounter, for whatever reason, through some kind of trauma. I mean, the experience you had, which is in UFO Symphonic, it seemed to be preceded by some kind of trauma. And this trauma, it sort of knocks us out of our everyday way of looking at the world. And it makes us, as Jeff Kripal said, more porous. So maybe it's a near-death experience. Maybe it's an out-of-body experience. Could be a psychedelic experience. And some people just have encounters. Just a Marian vision appears before them, or a UFO having never seen anything before. Um, so there's to answer your question, it's this. That's a very hard thing to talk to people who are mainstream about it, because when you start to talk to them about the phenomena being kind of trickstery, you can lose them pretty quickly
Yeah.
because they don't quite understand that. But when you look at what's happening as we understand the world of physics more, I mean, that begins when you enter the palace of quarks. Suddenly you're in a place where it too has a kind of trickstery quality to it. Light can be particles and waves. Um, the uncertainty principle, which undermines this notion that we kind of believe we live in this Newtonian physics world where all of physical reality is a billiard ball table. And at the quantum level, that's just not so. It's more probabilistic. And these are things that, the observer influences the outcome. That is just absolutely mind blowing that consciousness is not this thing that in philosophy they'll tell you is it just arises kind of mysteriously from the brain. It just, somehow it just pops, it pops up from the different physical processes underlying it. Um, but it's interesting that consciousness plays a part in our understanding of quantum reality. I think that should give us pause.
Well, and an interesting kind of correlation there. People watching this channel definitely going to be familiar with slide 9, which was a DoD briefing slide on, via ATIP, Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, or, who people will speculate, well, is actually used for OSAP, but it is known as an ATIP slide. So I'll just say it as that. And on the slide, on the bottom in this like little box, it says what was once quantum mechanics is, or what was once phenomena is now understood basically as quantum mechanics. I'm paraphrasing,
Hmm.
but it's the acknowledgement of that aspect, in a way to perceive and better understand uh, UFOs, pretty much. Uh, but you know, given everything you've just said, we are going to talk about UFO symphonic as well. But those kind of themes, so we're clearly somewhat on the deep end here already. Uh,
Yeah.
Discuss, which is fine. The watchers and the listeners here are going to be familiar with a lot of that. But
Hmm.
what do you what do you what do you make of, we have that conversation that's been really uh, enriching. More people
Hmm.
are getting involved in the UFO subject, UAP, anomalous experiences. That conversation is kind of flourishing right now, even if not in the mainstream. But yet here in the mainstream, we have all this narrative, right, that
Hmm.
you mentioned before. So what do you make of that? The mainstream kind of narrative, generally UFOs, um, kind of the militaristic
Mm.
highlighting and national security aspect of UFOs, and the way that it's spun out in the media.
Yeah, to some extent, I mean, it's good that the conversation's being had.
Right.
So that
Yeah.
feels
Yeah.
good that,
Yeah.
that Congress is talking about this and just in general, it seems to, because I mean, you know this better than I do because you've been at this longer than I have. But if you were to say UFO, you're going to get chuckles, you're going to get, and all of that kind of thing. Um, what I don't love about that, the what the media focuses on is the military aspect of it. I mean, you have these things if you listen to, uh, you know, the pilots and David Grush and all of the uh, the observations, the tic tac uh, viewing. If something is moving at 80,000 miles an hour in 3 seconds, I mean, what can our military do about it, right? So it's kind of a even with the recent drone things. I mean, what have people been doing? They've been trying to shoot at the drones.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
I you know I It's good that it's sort of moved in there, but the conversation to be had is a much more complex conversation. And I think that, introducing it through different channels, like say through fiction, introducing it through associating it with other topics, I think anything that we could do, anything short of everything, is never enough. But
Yeah.
just to kind of get it in there where people are thinking a little bit more broadly. I mean, it's so fascinating that the UFO experiences are around, sometimes have been around nuclear sites. And the revelations that people have are um, protect the planet.
Yeah.
There seems to be interesting things that come out of that. You don't really hear that so much in the mainstream. You don't hear the that some people, yes, they may have a traumatic experience, and then they find themselves on a journey of a deeper understanding of who they are, who we are, why we're here. Um, so yeah, I mean, it's I talk to, and I'm sure you have to do this too, but a lot of times what I try to do is meet people where they are. So when I
Yeah.
bring up, if the subject comes up, I try to meet them where they are. So
Right.
you live in what we think is a 15 billion year old universe. Um, as far as we can see, you think in this vast universe, which only our telescopes can only see so far, and now our scientists are saying we live in a multi-dimensional universe. So there are universes suffused, that are, right here and now, just like that description of Flatland. You think this is all here for us? I mean, that just seems that seems like a Ptolemaic view of the universe. Like, here's the Earth and everything else is around us,
Yeah.
and it's all here for our benefit. So I don't know. I mean, how do you feel when you know, uh, you hear the media talking about it? What's your reaction to that?
I mean, part of it, I guess, is where people are, like you were saying.
Hmm.
I so and again, I'm glad the conversation's going on, and I'm glad people like David Grush, came forward, Lou Elizondo, Christopher Mellon, to their credit, and not. I'm sure that was a difficult choice for them to make,
Yeah.
and that involves sacrifice, and it's part of why everything's going on. So, a lot of gratitude for everybody who went out of their way to help this conversation take place and take it where it is. Um, but again, you have people, I think they're trying to, I mean, a lot of people they're just realizing it's real. They're actually and honestly, because they have permission to, in a sense, because it's more widely spoken about, uh, kind of asking the question like, or like, holy crap, this is real.
Hmm.
And for people studying the subject or have been interested in the subject for many years, like we're kind of over that. We're done
Hmm.
with that a long time ago. So for people just coming to the realization of, oh, this is real, that their first questions are going to be like, oh my God, should we be worried? Should we be concerned? They don't really have much of a point of reference other than what's in entertainment and media,
Hmm.
because if they're not researchers. So there definitely is an aspect of influence regarding the media. I mean, from the media point of view, to get clicks, right? Corporate media, legacy media, clicks. Like that's their number one concern. Um, there's also the aspect of what other media and legacy media have relationships with intelligence services, United States intelligence services, most definitely, on like, okay, how do we guide this conversation for better or worse, whether they believe that they're cushioning people or they're leading them to look in a certain direction and not to look over here.
Hmm.
For national security interests, but also for whatever else they can justify. So I mean those are just a few aspects, and then there's personal opinion, right? The
Hmm.
people reporting on it in the media believe that what they think they know, and they're going to go with that too. So there's a lot of moving parts. Um, but again, there are people asking questions now. It's not irregular to have an article in the like mainstream media now saying UFO crash retrieval,
Hmm.
which I never thought I'd see the day. Basically, that headline is talking about recovered UFOs and reverse engineering. So
Right.
that is definitely progress. Uh, but for people who have been in this a long time, they have a high standard or expectation of where the conversation should be, and I understand that. But at the same time, you have people that are literally just looking at this question for the first time. Uh,
Yeah.
so it's difficult in that sense. And I think if you just tell people, they're going to get it. But I don't think everybody believes that are, the people, let's say the gatekeepers, believe that necessarily. I think that there's different camps that influence this subject, and some of them want partial disclosure, some of them want no disclosure, and probably less of them, but certainly some of them want like a full kind of disclosure thing.
Hmm.
Other than what the technology aspect or in the national security sense, but they kind of want the whole thing out there, non-human intelligence. I mean, it's in the it's in the the written language, right, where they tried to do the UAP Disclosure Act. So that in itself was very telling.
Hmm.
Non-human intelligence is mentioned over 20 times. They're talking about crash retrievals and retrieved technology of non-human origin and such. So that is a far step, but again, I think just like you said, we need so many more angles pushing on the conversation as like I guess you can even say that you did with UFO Symphonic, where it's a completely different way of looking at the UFO phenomenon.
Yeah. I wanted to. So from my perspective, I feel like disclosure has happened, and part of the government's reticence to disclose is that I don't think they know the whole thing. They don't know. And how do you convey this to people? And so how do you convey that these are kind of like dream images? They're not literal. This the UFO phenomena is deliteralized. It has a kind of duplicitous aspect to it. So how do we tell that story? And I think that's what I've been trying to do is to tell the story. If you have a story that uh, is comprehensible to people, it like invites them in, and then maybe they can dig a little deeper. And so in UFO Symphonic, I'm a musician. I'm deeply interested in music. I've done lots of music journalism. I would say that my music journalism, it tends to it tends to go into the spiritual realm. So I wrote a book about a famous bluegrass musician, Peter Rowan. It's called Mescalito Riding His White Horse. I mean, the title alone should, tell you where that's going. Um, and but I approach these as I approach the subject, even of music, from a spiritual, from a kind of psychological, a psychic perspective. And so I collected stories. Some of in UFO Symphonic, I have some introduction, kind of what I'm speculating, and I'm not right on the nose with what I'm exactly trying to say. I'm using music as a kind of a modality, as a contact modality, and the contact could be like with whom, with what. Um, that's a big tent. Um, what I asked people to do, as I did with you, and got a story from you, is tell me something that involves the phenomena, an experience you've had that is complete, that doesn't that you cannot explain rationally and has a music component. And so the responses I got back are completely various. And I didn't really drive anyone to say, well, here's the criteria. I didn't do this in a way that I made you tell me the story I wanted to hear.
Yeah.
So your story, there's similarities in the story that you have and some other stories that I collected as well. But some people just have bizarre experiences of phenomena like a flute that uh, the long story of it is that uh, my friend Frank had a flute that was his partner Sue's, and she was an incredible bluegrass musician. She played with all of the luminaries. She was also a physicist as well, very accomplished person. And Frank had this flute that didn't play. She left it to him as all of her belongings. She died young of cancer. And he's with Peter Rowan, after a festival they went to. And Peter sees this box and he says, "What's that?" "That's Sue's flute." And then Peter takes the flute out and he starts playing it, and it hadn't played. And then together they write this song in this kind of fever pitch back and forth. And it's a kind of ecstatic feeling because uh, Frank has, Sue is still deep in his heart, and I think she's passed about 10 years. And they made a song magically, um, uh, that was produced on a flute that couldn't play. And then Peter puts the flute down. They start talking. He picks the flute back up, and it won't play. So it was like interesting that it involved grief. A lot of the stories do kind of they do cohere around grief. Not always, but there's a death component or a communication with someone or something from the beyond. But I think the way I went about it is I'm I'm very fascinated by uh, how music and you notice that it's not just about music, it's journeys into sound and how sound could be very transportive. You've gone to the, you know, about the Monroe Institute and the hemisync.
Yeah.
Um, so the use of I've done that as well, and it's incredibly powerful. But, Robert Monroe talked about having communication with beings, and what you know what's interesting? What were the beings telling him? How to be a better human being, to provide guidance, to save the planet, to be more respectful to the planet. Interesting, that this wasn't necessarily, certainly wasn't a UFO in the way we would talk about it, but there was a psychic aspect to it, and but that through the use of this hemisync, and I've played with it, and it's pretty powerful. It's very hypnotic, and you start to have these hypnagogic images and kind of narratives pop up out of nowhere, and they can develop further. I also went to a San Pedro uh, ritual. So San Pedro is it's an alkaloid, similar to mescaline, not as strong as mescaline as peyote, but it's very gentle actually. But uh, there were shamans. There were three of them, brothers. I went with my wife, and you were taken, the use of drumming and rhythm and chanting, and you were just taken on this incredible journey. And really, where the journey took me was to a place of compassion, and it was uh, to a place of reflection. And my mother had been very ill; she was dying, and she was frankly very cantankerous, very hard to deal with. Now, I was very very good to my mom, as were my brother and two sisters, but it sort of opened my heart to more of what she was going through, and just on other things as well. I felt kind of emotionally more porous. And so these are some of the things I didn't set out to, to uh, write the book in that way, to be honest with you. I just was doing research, and the research changed the direction of the book. And then there's the kind of prosaic ways that music is a kind of transport system. I mean, it takes you back in time. You relive things. There's one story about a conductor who conducts the works of dead composers, but he has to, in a sense, communicate with these composers. He has to get inside their minds, and there's a communication that's happening with him and that composer. And then when you finally get to the stage where now you have true magic, you've worked for months on, the written music and the performances and working with all of the musicians, and now there's the audience, and there's this kind of the bridge to the audience that happens, this connection, this communication where people are moved, and it's bi-directional. So there are many ways that music, in the way like poetry or mythology, is a bridge to our imagination. The deliteralization, especially of, and I think that's the thing that's hard to get across, James, is when you get into this notion of duplicitous, that the phenomenon could be a trickster and shapeshifter. That really, some people have a very hard time accepting and wanting to get on board with that. But I think that things like music, poetry, mythology are other examples of that. And somehow they buy that. They buy that a little bit easier.
Yeah. I
And so I'm
mean,
just, yeah.
I guess the trickster element aspect of it or even the quality of encounters and interactions, if it's I think it's harder to explain that to somebody unless they've experienced it and seen like even the reflective quality that Keel talks about, that in some regards it seems like the phenomenon is reflecting even what your subconscious has or is projecting or has
Mm-hmm.
stored, and in some way even, you know, not exactly or always, but reflecting your expectation in a way.
Mm-hmm.
There's quality, and if you haven't experienced something like that, it's really hard to try to
Yeah.
explain that to somebody and for them to take it literally and at face value, because it's the questions that follow that are getting into the nature of reality and consciousness itself,
Mm-hmm.
which is deep. So if you haven't had the experience where you're like, I get it, it could be hard to grasp. They'll a lot of time, and I completely understand this. They'll try to rationalize that as well. They actually mean this. It's like,
Right.
no, that's not what we're actually talking about. That there's actually an element of the phenomena that is literally like that.
Mm-hmm.
And without having experienced that in again, and maybe not even just with like a UFO, but a near death experience or out of body experience, or even plant medicine or what have you, it's going to be hard to try to explain that to somebody.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but there are people, again, another thing I love about the UFO subject and disclosure to some degree is that it's allowing these conversations, because if all of a sudden, wow, UFOs are real, and even, hey, aliens are real, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now you have to take a step back and say, what else is real that we've been just like taking for granted as stories and myths, or metaphors that are holy shit, there's a reality to some of this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So, that's another reason I love the UFO subject so much, is that it is really, it has that, again, that I'll always say this, the quality that's both physical and metaphysical, and
Mm-hmm.
it's like a bridge from, consensus reality to infinity, basically. Uh, it opens all doors. All of a sudden everything's on the table.
Right. And I think it, it's interesting, people like Donald Hoffman writing about,
Right.
from the cognitive perspective that, but it's interesting how those things connect up. If I can draw that little connection between them, he says that what we have is an interface that's built to help us survive, but it's not really there to show us reality in quotes.
Yeah.
Um, you have like a Tibetan Buddhism and the idea that, we live in Maya, that things are provisionally real. It's not to say that they're not real. I mean, if you step on my toe, you're going to hurt me, but it's provisionally real. It's real for a time, for now. I mean, what is this body a million years from now? It goes into broken down to its constituent parts and disperses throughout, the universe. Or pretty much anything. You take any object or anything, it's real. This mouse is real as it is right now for this moment. But what were these constituent parts a million years ago? How did they get together? Who assembled them? What was the lives of the people that worked in the factory? Who built that factory? And then a million years hence, or 10 million years hence. So I'm not saying that things aren't real. They're provisionally real. And then you match that up. You look at what science is telling us. It's kind of telling us those same things. So yeah, there's the opportunity for, if we want to dig deeper, if we want to uh, scratch the surface, this subject can lead us um, into a much deeper conversation. And I guess it's, there are a lot of people that, and I'm not. life is hard. It's
Yeah.
just hard to get by, to do the things you got to do, and take care of kids and pay your bills. I don't want to put anything on anyone that they don't want to have, but there is that kind of calling. And if you get that calling, it's like in mythology when, you follow the deer into the forest, and then now you're aloft on, a journey of, all of these magical, incredible things happen. But you don't have to follow that deer. You could just say, I'm
Mm.
staying here.
Yeah.
Uh, so it's the opportunity for, and it's sort of where we started. It's the opportunity for discovery. And if you wish to think deeper, about why we're here, and maybe that changes your behavior and how you treat people, and what it is you choose to do in life to maybe make a difference, or so on.
Yeah, absolutely. And even just a short thing on the symphonic aspect, whether it be music or the binaural beats and tones like hemisync and just listening to say music or drumming, right? Or the binaural tones changes it has the ability to put you in something like an altered state. Let's say that.
Hmm.
And you know, either during or after that altered state, you're quite literally experiencing reality different than you were before, right? So you're literally experiencing the world in a different way through something as what, we would say as simple as sound, right? Frequency,
Hmm.
sound, tones, uh, have the ability to alter your mind and therefore alter your perception and therefore ultimately your actions, right? So there's a whole chain effect uh,
Hmm.
to that. And, that can go pretty deep.
I mean, the Beatles changed the world.
Yeah.
Whether you like them or not, they
Yeah.
definitely, just vastly changed the world. And I think, there are a lot of levels that music conveys information. Um, I kind of sometimes hear music. I hear the sounds of birds. I hear the whooshing of wind, and I kind of feel there's something in there. There's something that it is trying to tell us something. We sort of, we kind of, go through our lives, and at least, mostly in Western society, there are some societies that do venerate and do acknowledge the mystery of these things. But maybe there's information in there. Sometimes I hear it birds, when spring is happening, and I live right by Prospect Park, and so there's a lot of huge bird variety. And I'm thinking, when we understand what they're saying, it's like we've matured as a species. When we actually listen and begin to, pay attention to that, maybe it's a litmus test.
Yeah. And that on a rudimentary level, that's contact with non-human intelligence.
Exactly. To the point, and that's why, and for all we know, I wanted it to be terrestrial and extraterrestrial. I mean, we have life teeming around us, complex, interesting life. And, for the most part, it's not judgment. It's just for the most part, it's overlooked.
Yeah.
It's, we have vast, forests with complex, mycorrhizal floors that connect, help trees, you know, provide nutrition and nourishment to uh, uh, other living creatures in the forest. And there's this interconnected nature about all of this. I mean, that's vast intelligence. And we probably stomp through it and knock the tree down, and just without in native cultures, when if there's you go to knock a tree down, to cut a tree down, there's rumination. There's you look at the tree. Is there a bird nest in it? How do you feel? How do you feel about that tree? Is it telling you something? You don't just go and do it haphazardly without thinking. You do it with thought and with getting in touch with that deliteralizing sense of that the unconscious sense of maybe this isn't the right thing to do here, and move on, look at a different tree.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, there's vast intelligence around us, and some of it's happening in the form of music, and not all of it's coming from instruments. Some of it's just coming from, you know, the fluttering of leaves, which then people make into instruments because it has an interesting sound. Musicians and bands are constantly seeking, how do I take a new sound and sample it and put it in my music?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
it's a kind of a quest, uh, for whatever purposes. But just the act of listening is an act of, uh, it's a generous act in a way. Listen to each other, the deeper you listen to music, the deeper it goes. Um, I have my wife will sit here and listen to music, and I'll play something over and over again, and she'll after a while she'll say, "Okay, I think I got it. Please move on, hit forward."
Yeah.
Uh, but I do think there's something in there. There's math. The I think the science of the future is it's math, but it has a psychic. It has a psi component to it. It has science that involves the unconscious, that involves intuition. It's bigger. And
Yeah.
that's kind of what I was going about, trying to describe as poetically as I could, using different voices that weren't just my own, to get other perspectives, but they yet cohered around, the subject of music.
Yeah. Yeah. And so that's something that is completely new to me. I'm not a music person
Mm.
per se. I'm of course I listen to music now and then, but I don't know music the way clearly that you do, that you know music and writing, right?
Mm.
Um, but Mike, it's been great having you on. Where can people find all your work?
Well, first of all, thank you very much, James. It's great to talk to you, and it's I really appreciate you giving me the opportunity. You can go to MikeFiorito.com. Uh, you can see all of my books there. UFO Symphonic. It will. It's available for pre-order. I do have copies on hand. I have limited copies. If someone is interested, they can message me. And if you go to my website, you can get in touch with me. But it will publish February 1st.
Definitely. Well,
So whatever
yeah,
way they want to go about it.
yeah. Thank you so much for coming on, and for sure we'll have you on again sometime soon and have a even longer conversation. So
Would love that.
yeah,
Well,
thank
thanks
you
so
so
much,
much.
James. Thank you.
Yeah, take care.
Take care.